Welcome back, everyone. We are returning to our second panel today, and I want to introduce each of them. I know them well and have a great deal of respect for them as individuals, and hopefully this will be a very valuable opportunity for all of us to get a new perspective on how we can address this problem. First on our panel is Dr. Elizabeth Van Winkle. She's the Executive Director, Force Resiliency at the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. Our second panelist is Lieutenant General Darrell Williams, the Superintendent of the United States Military Academy. Third, Vice Admiral Walter Carter, who is the Superintendent of the Naval Academy. Finally, Lieutenant General Jay Silveria, who's the Superintendent of the U.S. Air Force Academy. We welcome each of you now to make your opening statements.
Thank you. Madam Chair, Ranking Member Kelly, and other distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for having me here today to discuss the results of the DoD Annual Report on Sexual Harassment and Violence at the Military Service Academies. 2 years ago, I sat before you and pledged we would do more to end sexual assault at our academies. 2 years ago, I told you how we were committed to promoting an environment where all were treated with dignity and respect. I vowed we would work to reinvigorate our prevention approaches. I meant what I said, yet I sit before you and deliver news too similar to what I reported 2 years ago. Sexual assault is on the rise again at the academies. While each of the academies developed and implemented action plans that were not yet fully in place for the current assessment, department leadership was not complacent, waiting for implementation, and therefore another increase in rates is simply unacceptable. Preventing criminal behavior and other misconduct, providing care for service members, and holding offenders appropriately accountable have been and continue to be top priorities. And yet, our most recent data indicates we have far to go to eliminate this abhorrent crime. It is devastating to be sitting here again to deliver this most unwelcome report. Our data tells us that rates of unwanted sexual contact increased by varying degrees across the academies, all too high. Rates of sexual harassment also varied among the academies, but are also unacceptably high, particularly among women. The data also indicated that across the 3 academies, a large majority of students think their senior leaders are making honest and reasonable efforts to address these behaviors, but not all do. These same students rate the efforts of their peer leaders much lower, and additional data showed declining rates for students watching out for each other to prevent these crimes. This tells us that despite our hard work, some cadets and midshipmen still feel empowered to disrespect and victimize others. And equally challenging, there are some who feel neither empowered nor responsible in their daily peer interactions to hold each other accountable. The vast majority of cadets and midshipmen are good people and will become the strong leaders our nation needs. Yet we must show them how to leverage their moral courage to create an environment where all can serve with dignity and respect. There is no single fix for this. We cannot blame our way out. We cannot train our way out. The department, Congress, and our nation as a whole has been challenged to crack the code on how to change behavior regarding sexual misconduct. But the Department of Defense, we are the ones who have been entrusted by the country to lead the way. We must lead, and we are working to do just that. We will change our approach. What we have done in the past may not be abandoned, but we must determine what needs to be done differently, what needs to be adjusted, and what needs to be implemented anew. We are analyzing the breadth of data we have, and we will continue to partner and collaborate with other experts in this field who have found strategies that show promise. We have already taken some steps. We have hired prevention specialists from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to inform our efforts and assessments. We are enhancing reporting procedures that will be available throughout the armed forces, but geared towards the unique concern of our cadets and midshipmen and aim to address repeat offenders. We will refocus our efforts and look at the full life cycle of cadets and midshipmen from selection through to graduation and work to target our approaches accordingly. Our focus will be to not only achieve progress, but to sustain it over time. I am optimistic our new direction will render intended results, and I sit before you today frustrated but resolved. I have been working in this field for over 20 years, 10 in the civilian sector and nearly 10 with the military. I left the civilian sector because I felt I was spending too much of my time fighting a system that seemed impervious to influence. I am committed to stay with the Department of Defense because I have the support of my leadership and because I have witnessed our system make changes over the past decade to produce an infrastructure of policies, programs, and resources that have benefited our military members and are not found in the civilian sector. We are not there yet, but we are committed. No one has solved this, and if there were a single solution to eliminate sexual assault, we would have done it already. We are responsible for behavior change. We take individuals and we mold them. We instill courage where there may have been none. We impart discipline where there may have otherwise been disorder. We create lethal global warriors from young women and men who may have never even left their local communities. Eliminating sexual misconduct from the ranks remains a challenge, but one we refuse to run from. We will not tolerate it, and we will not stop until we get this right. We appreciate your concern and support as we work to protect the people who volunteer to keep our nation safe. Thank you for the opportunity to come and speak with you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Van Winkle. Next, Lieutenant General Williams.
Madam Chair, Ranking Member Kelly, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity today to talk about the very serious problem of sexual assault and sexual harassment at the United States Military Academy. I wish I were here to tell you how we have solved this problem at West Point, but I'm not. Instead, I'm here today because this abhorrent behavior continues to manifest itself within our ranks. Any case of unwanted sexual contact or sexual harassment is unacceptable. Our mission is to develop leaders of character for the Army who will fight and win our nation's land conflicts and who are ready to lead in the crucible of ground combat. The issues I will discuss today have a direct impact on Army readiness. Sexual assault and harassment erode readiness and our ability to accomplish the mission. I am personally committed to preventing sexual assault and harassment, and I'm resolute in my commitment to continue to seek solutions at West Point. While I'm here to talk to you about West Point, I recognize this problem is not isolated to West Point and the Army. The increase in the number of cadets experiencing unwanted sexual conduct is unacceptable and troubles me greatly. These acts erode trust, are contrary to our Army's core values and impact readiness. These are situations that no one should ever have to experience. As leaders, we must protect the welfare of the victims who trusted us while at the same time holding the perpetrators accountable and appropriate for their actions, and as appropriate for their actions in accordance with due process of law. As we continuously improve our program, we must also focus on changing the culture to prevent these acts from occurring in the first place. To that end, we are open and welcome to forums such as these to find ideas we may not yet have considered. While much of what we see within the survey is troubling, some of the results are encouraging and indicate our efforts so far are having some effect on trust in our organization. 85% of cadets surveyed indicated they believe the Academy's senior leaders are taking honest and reasonable efforts to stop sexual assault. The fact that cadets trust their leadership is a direct result of our continued efforts to address this problem. More troubling, though, is the lack of trust they have in their peer leaders. This is a cultural problem that we must address. When cadets first report to West Point, they bring with them a set of values developed over their past 18 years. Our job is to take these young men and women and mold them into leaders with a character that aligns with the ideals of West Point and the values of our Army. We frequently talk about our leader development program as a 47-month developmental experience. But when it comes to sexual harassment and sexual assault, we don't have 4 years to shape their behavior and attitudes. We must prioritize our prevention efforts early on in their cadet experience. Moving forward, we will strengthen our education efforts to provide cadets the knowledge and skills needed to define and address the behaviors that are occurring. We will also continue to address cultural challenges like social media and access to illicit materials that impact our population, with the goal of helping cadets think more critically about themselves and their relationships. Success in our prevention and education efforts must permeate throughout the entire West Point community. Every individual working or living at West Point needs to recognize his or her role in contributing to this cultural change. Thank you for the opportunity to share our work with the committee. I appreciate your feedback in helping us find a solution. As we are in the business of developing leaders of character for our Army and nation, we must set and continue to enforce the highest of standards. I look forward to answering your questions.
Admiral Carter.
Madam Chair, Ranking Member Kelly, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today on behalf of the United States Naval Academy. Our mission is to develop midshipmen morally, mentally, and physically, and to imbue them with the highest ideals of duty, honor, and loyalty. We have a responsibility to ensure that the brigade of midshipmen has the opportunity to develop professionally in an environment that fosters dignity and respect. Despite dedicated efforts by the Naval Academy leadership and the brigade, we continue to experience incidents of unwanted sexual contact within our ranks. I and the rest of my leadership team have actively sought out professional advice from the experts on the best strategies to reduce this scourge within our student body. While we've made some productive improvements, we must do better. We initiated our plan of action this past summer. It is a comprehensive approach from admission to graduation and includes the following 4 primary components. First, we continue our rigorous pre-admission screening process, which relies on required teacher recommendations and police record checks to identify potential character challenges of those applying to the Naval Academy. Second, we continue to hone our sexual assault prevention programs. In addition to updating our student-led training program, this past year we launched an interdisciplinary evaluation of the entire 4-year leadership curriculum, pulling together all themes addressing life skills. This effort more closely aligned all programs and resulted in publishing a life skills handbook. Third, we've launched several initiatives to promote responsible alcohol choices, as we understand the strong correlation between alcohol use and unwanted sexual contact. Since we put these new initiatives into effect, we have experienced a 49% fewer alcohol-related incidents. Finally, we must continue to hold perpetrators appropriately accountable. All allegations of sexual assault are thoroughly investigated by the Naval Criminal Investigative Service and receive careful legal review prior to me deciding on a disposition. We are not where I want us to be, nor where the Navy needs us to be. The Naval Academy must produce leaders that not only treat others with dignity and respect, but also demand the same of those they lead. Thank you for your time today. I'm prepared to address your questions.
Thank you, Vice Admiral. Lieutenant General J. Silveria.
Madam Chair, Ranking Member Kelly, and other distinguished members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity today to discuss an issue that is fundamental to the health and safety of our cadets at the United States Air Force Academy, and of grave importance to our national security. Thank you for your dedication to confronting sexual harassment and sexual assault, misconduct that has no place at our academies or in our military. And for your concern about the well-being of our cadets and cadet candidates, I can assure you that these are concerns shared not only by myself and also by our dedicated staff, faculty, leadership, and most importantly, the cadets. As Superintendent of the Air Force Academy, I am here on behalf of our 4,281 cadets and 203 preparatory school cadet candidates, as well as the faculty and staff that are developing them into the future of leaders of our Air Force. But I'm also here as an Academy graduate, as a leader of airmen privileged to wear this uniform for more than 33 years. And as a father of 2 young members of this same generation, we are training and educating. From each of these perspectives, the results of the recent survey are disgusting. They do not reflect the standards we hold ourselves to as leaders. They do not reflect the core values of the United States Air Force or our Academy. We are committed to addressing these issues head-on, to be an example for the Air Force, Department of Defense, and society. It is clear our past efforts have not had the effects we intended or expected. These results are unacceptable. There is no question, even one instance of sexual assault or sexual harassment at our Academy is a problem. Far too many of our cadets have had experiences along the spectrum of harmful behaviors, from sexual harassment to sexual assault. The survey data shows that our cadets have been harmed, and that too many feel they can't come forward for help and support. It shows that cadets have harmed the peers they intend to serve alongside in defense of our nation. The data does not show us exactly why these egregious acts occurred, but we know that these are people, not statistics, and that leadership is the solution. I am frustrated and angered by the results, but I will not rest in my leadership until we get this right. In addition to implementing direction from the Department of Defense and Department of the Air Force, we are taking action with several current and future programs I have highlighted in my written testimony that we can elaborate on today and provide detailed information on as requested. Holding perpetrators of these crimes appropriately accountable is key to our efforts. When a victim makes an unrestricted report of sexual assault, we make sure the victim is getting necessary care and support, and the Air Force Office of Special Investigations begins to investigate. In addition to courts-martial and administrative discipline tools, we have a cadet discipline system that allows me to disenroll cadets for misconduct, as well as boards of inquiry, typically used for officer discharges. For those victims who are hesitant to testify publicly, these processes give them a voice in a non-public setting while affording those accused of crimes their due process rights. In recent years, this committee has heard testimony from our Academy superintendents, from experts, and from survivors on our progress, or really lack thereof, on this very topic. I appreciate your continued vigilance on a serious problem that requires steadfast attention. Your oversight is rooted in a care for our cadets and our military that I wholeheartedly share. I also share your frustration, impatience, and anger that you may have for the results we've seen this year. I have personally met with many survivors, both men and women, one-on-one, that come to me voluntarily. I have learned and will continue to learn a great deal about their survivor experiences. As a commander, leader, airman, and father, their stories and their faces rock me to the core. And my motivation to change this culture, and they are my motivation to change this culture and stop this crime. We invite you to come visit our campus, see our programs firsthand, please, and speak with faculty, staff, and cadets. We hope that through these interactions we can work together towards improvement. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss a topic so vital to the future success of our Academy and our military, and to the health and safety of our cadets. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General Severia. I'd like to begin by asking Dr. Van Winkle a general question. You have been in this area for a very long time. You've done a lot of research. You do a lot of analysis. In your experience, what percentage of victims are telling the truth?
Based on the data that we have, and this is active duty and at the service academies, we see about 2% of the reports of sexual assault to be unfounded, which means that there's evidence that the crime did not occur. So it is a vast minority.
So, vast minority. It's 98% of those that are coming forward are telling the truth.
What we know is there's a larger proportion where we have an unsubstantiated report, and that means there wasn't enough evidence to move forward with a case of sexual assault. But that's very different than a false report. That false report, meaning that the crime did not occur, is at that 2%.
So, one of the issues that I think we have to address moving forward is the fact that there are so many restricted reports, and they're restricted because of this fear of retaliation. I think that if we get to a place where that information is shared, maybe online with Callisto or some other company that provides that kind of benefit, so that the victim can go online, put down information about their experience, photographs if they want, identify the perpetrator, and then if they see that that perpetrator is in fact responsible for conducting himself or herself in the same manner with others, they are more motivated either to come forward in an unrestricted report and hopefully rid the military of the predator. Let me ask the three superintendents, have each of you spoken to your cadets and midshipmen about this report? Have you had an actual information setting in which you have provided them with this information?
Yes, ma'am, I have electronically through the whole Corps. My commandant in the last week has, and we're doing a full West Point stand down. There'll be no classes, there'll be no sports, there'll be nothing about me talking to the cadets on the 25th of February. I plan to shut down everything and do what we call a stand down. So I have not had the opportunity to talk to the cadets, but my commandant has in the last week. And I've talked and sent a note to, immediately after the report came out, I sent a note electronically to every single one of my cadets.
Vice Admiral Carter.
Madam Chair, I've addressed the entire brigade upon their reformation after holiday break. And I rarely have the whole brigade together where I do not cover this topic. But we covered this topic based on this report, and they have heard the details of this report. And to be quite frank, the reaction from the brigade was also the same reaction that all of us have. It was one of shock. So I don't take that as anything that changes that, except the brigade was surprised by the results.
General Severia.
Yes, ma'am. I have addressed the cadet wing about this report, and part of that, I told them that I would planning on discussing with them next week. I have sessions planned with all of the classes to discuss this testimony. Additionally, I opened up to all of them after I explained the report to send me emails, and at this point, I have so many that I can't get through.
General Severia, I'm in receipt of an email from the Vice Commandant, which I would like to ask unanimous consent that we submit for the record, and I think the copy has been made available to you. Do you have it there?
Yes, ma'am, I have it here.
So what troubles me about this email is it appears that there's been a crest that has been stolen at the Academy. And I guess it's one of those pranks that happens not all that rarely. But the essence of the complaints, I guess, that have been visited on Colonel Campbell is that there's more interest in the concern about returning the class crest than in talking about the results of the survey of sexual harassment and sexual assault. The one part of this email that is deeply troubling to me that I want to read and get your comments on is the last paragraph, in which he says, your cadet leaders are not at fault for the information flow. I am. If you want a target, it is me. They have no control on this topic. If you are that passionate, my door is open. Come on in, and we can discuss. If you want to attack from a platform or medium of anonymity, then have at it. You are a coward, and we aren't listening. If you have a problem, bring a solution. There is no room in our Air Force for those not willing to own their opinions or positions. If you don't like this idea, you are free to leave. I'll happily expedite your transition to the civilian world. We hold higher standards here. If you don't like them, move on. You don't deserve to lead our incredible airmen. Do you have a comment about that?
Yes, ma'am. If I can add some context. Yes, it was a prank where the cadets, the freshmen, the fourth classmen had stolen the crest.
I'm not concerned about the crest.
Yes, ma'am. And so in the effort to recover the crest, the cadet leadership was trying to find through who had taken the crest. And in that, there was a lot of conversation about the crest, and it was beginning to take over a lot of the conversation among the cadet wing. And so at the same time was the moment that I stepped in and I addressed the cadet wing about these results and told them that I was going to testify. And so Colonel Campbell was very concerned that the cadets perceived that there was a perception that the crest was more important than the results that I had discussed.
I understand
Yes,
all
ma'am.
that, General. My concern is
Yes,
one
ma'am.
of the issues that we're dealing with is this fear of retaliation. And anonymity is often offered to these cadets in a restricted report because of their fear of retaliation. And the way I read that last paragraph, he is mocking those who are commenting about the fact that there's more interest and concern about the crest being stolen than about talking about this issue of sexual assault and sexual harassment in the academies. And the tone of that email is hostile. And for anyone, if I was a cadet at the Air Force Academy, which I would never have gotten into, but if I was a cadet and I read that paragraph, I would know full well the last thing I would ever do is report a sexual assault.
Ma'am, in this case, the anonymity that he is referring to is using anonymity to use it as a platform to criticize. And that cyberbullying is what was going on that he was addressing directly. We all have, at all of our academies, we all have social media platforms that are anonymous, and they continue to be a problem. There's all sorts of different versions of them. And so this anonymous platform was being used to be very critical, very negative, and in his view, very cowardice. It was not about the fact that they wouldn't have a chance to report something anonymous. It was about the fact that they were anonymously criticizing about that fact. Ma'am, we fully support the idea of the restricted report. We fully support the idea of Callisto and others to give cadets that opportunity to report anonymously.
Okay, I don't know that I fully agree with you in terms of the evaluation of that paragraph, but let's move on. I want to see uniformity of benefits for the victims. I want to be able to say to each appointee that I make to the academies that you're all going to be treated alike if you are sexually assaulted or sexually harassed. So let me ask this. Would each of you offer to a cadet or a midshipman who has been sexually assaulted, either restricted or unrestricted, either confirmed or unconfirmed, the ability to take a sabbatical year? Lieutenant General Williams, just go down the line if you would.
Madam Chair, I would. In fact, we do. We do that now. It's called a medical leave of absence.
I don't know that we need to call it a medical leave of absence, but I think a sabbatical is something that doesn't carry with it a spin one way or the other. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. We
Admiral?
initiated that program a number of years ago, and it's alive and well.
Yes, ma'am, we've had it for a number of years, and it functions very well, 6 months and for a year.
And it's automatic if it's requested.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. How about a transfer to another academy? General Williams?
And if it would help the victim and help them heal in this process, I would support it. Yes, ma'am.
But you
Yes,
don't
Madam
have it
Chair.
presently,
We
correct?
do not, Madam Chair.
Admiral?
We have not gathered our thoughts together on the mechanism to do it. I am not opposed to it as superintendent of the Naval Academy. I do think that we'd have to understand that that would extend somebody's academic time, but if it benefited them to get through the undergraduate program at any of the service academies, I don't think any of us would have an issue with it.
Thank you. General?
Ma'am, I completely agree. If it benefited a victim, we don't have that mechanism in place right now, but if it benefited the victim, then I would fully support.
All right. And how about, I know at least one of the academies have taken a public position that you will not, there will be no action taken against you for collateral violations if you want to file a sexual assault or sexual harassment report. Is that true for all of you?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Has it been made public to all of the cadets?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Admiral?
Madam Chair, we have the same program, and this is one of those events where collaborating and seeing how the Air Force did it presented a much better idea than how we were doing it. So we have incorporated their program, and it's been announced to our brigade.
So this is the first year it'll be operational?
Well, it's a slight difference. We don't hold any of the victims to collateral misconduct during the course of the investigation. But in light of the way we see how Air Force did it, if the knowledge of misconduct comes up during the course of the investigation, never be held against the victim at all. We had been previously revisiting some misconduct after adjudication, but not to a separation level. I like the way I saw the Air Force Academy was doing it better, and we've just instituted that.
All right. General?
Ma'am, we did initiate that, as we call it, a safe to report policy that ensures that no collateral misconduct, that there no charges would be brought or any any retribution in any way for some misconduct if they were a sexual assault victim.
And finally, I think one of the admirals, one of the superintendents that I've spoken to in the last few days indicated that you are about to implement recoupment from first or second year cadets or midshipmen. Historically, it's only been juniors or seniors. And I want to know to what extent we can make that something that is going to be used in each of the academies across the board where there is a conviction.
Ma'am, I'll start. That was me. We, as you know, all of us seek recoupment for the last 2 years, but yes, we have changed that. So in the first 2 years, if you commit serious misconduct, in this case sexual assault or drug offense or something that you are disenrolled for serious misconduct, then we will seek recoupment.
Admiral?
We have not explored that possibility. We are now aware of it, and we're very interested in understanding how it works exactly. It should be the same. And as you know, it's a recommendation by us to our Secretary of the Navy or our service secretaries for that eventual decision. But I am in full support of that option.
Madam Chair, I'd be open to that as well. But we have not currently been in that space.
All right, and finally, Dr. Van Winkle, having gone over those various services and benefits for the victims, do you have any comments that you'd like to make about them?
No, I would just say that on the OSD side, we obviously understand that each of the academies have unique cultures and may have some differences in their policies and protocols. But where there is a promising practice, we support standardization across the academies.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The best way to prevent these crimes from happening is to prevent those with character issues from entering the academies to begin with. If each of you, starting with you, Dr. Van Winkle, can tell me how we can improve the nomination process as members, and you as the academies who's overseeing them, to ensure we have a good assessment of the candidate's character.
Thank you for the question. As you heard in my opening statement, we are looking at the entire life cycle of the cadets and midshipmen, including selection into the academies. This is not to say that the current selection criteria is inadequate. What we are looking at, and we are still in the infancy stages of evaluation on this, is whether there are additional metrics that we could use that get to that moral development and moral character that we're looking for. So we're right now just in the evaluation stage of the data and what we're looking for and what metrics might be feasible. But again, it is important to note that we are in no way saying that the selection criteria be changed. It would be more of an enhancement.
Thanks, Ranking Member Kelly. I think this is a place where we owe you a better model. We currently, when we admit cadets to West Point, we know very well their academic potential based on their academic performance, their SATs, ACTs. We require them to take a physical readiness aspect. What's missing, in my humble opinion, in 7 months as the superintendent is more there. We owe you a better template. We ask principals, teachers to write essays about Cadet X, Y. I think it's okay, but I think it could be more robust with more rigor in that space.
Admiral?
Sir, this is a tough problem to figure out, but I will tell you what we're currently doing where I think we could maybe do a little bit more. We put a great deal of stock in the teacher evaluations of prospective midshipmen. We often pick out nuggets within those evaluations that are very worthy for us to look at. The interviews that we do, we have blue and gold representatives. They represent me in the admission process, and of course interviews that either you or your staff do for your prospective candidates from your voting districts. We look at police records. I'd like to be able to tell you we have the access to look at everybody's social media background. We certainly do that for a number of the midshipmen that come to the Naval Academy, but it's not 100%. That is a space that could probably be looked at more. And I'll share with you that on occasion we get an anonymous letter about something that might have happened. And when that happens, we take that very seriously and we set up a character review board on that individual. So again, we're doing as much as we can right now, but I think we could still do a little bit more.
In general, real quickly.
Yes, sir. Sir, I think I would agree that we owe you that we need to work together better on that with your staffs and with your nomination processes, that all of us need to focus on qualities as opposed to qualifications of an individual. And just like Admiral Carter points out, we all look for the slightest hints and clues from teachers, from coaches, from recommendation letters. We look for the slightest and we pursue those, whether it's social media, police, we pursue any slightest lead that we have if there's any concern.
The only thing I'll say, and I know it's we already have issues with this resource-wise and getting security clearances for enough people, but that's much more in depth and they're much better qualified. So I don't know if we can morph that into something else or do something a little different, but sometimes those folks, having gone through a security clearance, may be able to do a similar thing that goes beyond what just the teachers say. As a former district attorney, I'm aware how challenging sexual assault offenses can be to prosecute. There are a litany of reasons why victims don't come forward. Some are retaliatory, some are a whole different range of options of why they don't come forward. Can you explain the current options you have available to hold the offenders accountable? And I'll start with you, General. What can you do as a commandant to hold a potential offender or an offender accountable?
Ranking Member Kelly, thank you. The Uniform Code of Military Justice, as we spoke earlier, gives me the options and tools I need as a commander. Short of that, you have non-judicial punishment. I have administrative actions I can take as well as working at echelon with my commander. So the chain of command in this space is very valuable in setting the right tone. Commanders set tone and expectations in a command, and that's the tools that I most cherish in this space.
And I would also just encourage you to understand that there's a code of moral and ethics and honor at each of the academies, and sometimes you may not be able to prove an unsubstantiated report against an offender, but other things they are doing makes him unfit to serve as an officer in the military service. And I would just encourage you, when you have that opportunity, you can still have that person go away if they have a course of conduct that you can't substantiate the sexual assault. You can do that otherwise. Developing morally and ethically strong officers is a primary mission of all the service academies. Trust is tantamount to good military orders, and especially among leaders. How do you incorporate character development into the curriculum at the academies? And if you can real quickly just tell me that. Character in the curriculum.
Ranking Member Kelly, we have the West Point Leader Development System, which is focused primarily on character. It's ingrained in all things we do, whether it's in academics, whether it's in sports. Character is my #1 line of effort at the United States Military Academy. So we do that both in terms of curriculum, in terms of pedagogy, but also in terms of practically how we do it day to day from a practitioner standpoint as well.
Sir, we have it embedded in our leadership curriculum, but recently, just over the last couple of years, it's taken us about 2 years to do. We completely revamped our aptitude measuring system, which now encompasses everything except academic performance and physical education performance, so that we can look at the character development specifically of our midshipmen. They actually get a discrete grade in a very subjective system that uses everything from peer ranking to rankings by others that are in their sports teams, their clubs, and ultimately the officer that is directly over them. So this is relatively new, and we find good progress.
Sir, we have a Center for Creative Leadership, a Center for Character and Leadership Development, and we use that as an integrating function for character elements across the curriculum, across the military training, and across the athletic department, so that it's integrated everywhere that a cadet interacts. There's character development and there's leadership responsibilities.
And the final question, and I'll start with you, Dr. Van Winkle, but I want to preface this with a statement. You guys are accountable to get this right and to make this the right thing. Our job is to make sure you have every tool available to you to make sure that we take care of each and every soldier, and so that we don't have one sexual assault, especially not a sexual assault that is not reported. So Dr. Van Winkle and each member, what tool can we give you that will help you do that? And if you need to do that in writing later, I'm fine. But what tool can we give you as Congress that helps you to do this mission?
I can respond right now generally that your partnership is extremely important. I do feel from the data that we see that our infrastructure is sound. We have some evidence that when somebody does make that courageous decision to report, that our systems that are in place are good systems. 81% of the service academy students who came forward to make a report said that they would make the same decision again. However, we have too few people reporting, and we have an issue in terms of our culture and climate, and that we need to look at our strategies. And we certainly appreciate your feedback on that as our partners in this space.
Ranking Member Kelly, 273 young men and women spoke to us on this survey. You've given us what we need. You've given us the resources. It's my responsibility as the superintendent at West Point to take care of the sons and daughters that you've given us. You've given us what we need. We need to get an action plan and come back to you and talk to you how we're going to fix this.
Sir, we're developing a multifaceted plan. I don't know that I need to ask for more resources or more capability in terms of us owning it, which we need to do. And I think that's what you're hearing from us today. I've been the superintendent for 5 years, and I have testified in front of this committee before. And as Dr. Van Winkle said, I committed myself to trying to improve in this. I am frustrated, and I think that we can't educate our way out of it. We can't train our way out of it. The accountability piece is what is going to move the needle on this, and I'm committed to getting that part better and more right. I think I have the resources to do that, but if we come up with something that we could ask you for, we're going to send you a note, sir.
Sir, I have the same sentiment. I have the resources, I have the policy that I need. What I need is to continue to build on the culture that I own and I'm responsible for as the leader. And it's clear from this survey, one of the major areas that we have to work on is the peer-to-peer relationship. And we're going to take that on. We already have some plans to do that, and I'll come back to you if I need resources. But right now, sir, I have the resources I need, but it's my responsibility as the leader to execute this, and I do on this.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Since you have indicated that you have a resource issue with reviewing the social media of applicants, why not ask the blue and gold officers to do that as they are spending time interviewing the potential candidates?
I think we could certainly incorporate that. It's certain districts, it's just going to be a little bit more time consuming, and I don't think there's anything that prevents us from doing it. I think there's any legal reason why we can't do it, so we'll explore that.
All right. Mrs. Davis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And going to the social media situation, and I know that I think Dr. Van Winkle, you mentioned this as well. I remember a hearing that we held several years ago, actually, and General Neller was there, and we asked that question basically, are you monitoring Facebook and Twitter, every possible account that a student has? And at that time, quite honestly, they weren't. And I know we had I had a discussion with the general just recently about this, and it still sounds to me like they're not doing as much as they could be doing in general recruiting. And so I think when it comes to the academies as well, I'm not suggesting that that's a panacea here, you know, that, but on the other hand, I think even from a sense of entitlement that somebody might be expressing on Twitter, which isn't blatant, I guess I would read that and I would, you know, want to know a little bit more. And so I'm really hopeful that if there are problems, if there are barriers, let's address them, let's figure it out. I can assure you that we don't have a barrier when we hire someone in our office. We let them know that we're going to take a look at their accounts. And I just think that's important. I think it's important for young people to know that for their future, it's better, and they not engage in that kind of behavior, even if they think it's, you know, just cool. So I hope you do that, and that, you know, that could be helpful. I also wanted to ask, I believe Admiral Carter, you mentioned that you thought you were getting at the alcohol problem, or you were seeing improvements. Is that right, sir? What are you doing specifically?
Yes, ma'am. What we have done is, again, a multifaceted approach. We went on this campaign in front of the whole brigade to make them understand that this is part of their professional life. We went to health and comfort inspections in the large dormitory that they all live in called Bancroft Hall. we have made sure that there is no alcohol inside the dormitory. And there's a very well-stated policy that if you're found with alcohol in your room, it's a dismissal, meaning you will be separated from the Naval Academy. We put together a joint task force that actually helped in putting together the education programs to show midshipmen why responsible use of alcohol was needed. We put together a program called Midnight Teachable Moments, where we actually use alcohol under controlled circumstances to show midshipmen exactly what the results of those are. So those are just some of the things that we've done. The midshipmen themselves created a guardian angel program. These are the seniors. So they go out in downtown Annapolis, which is walking
Right,
distance
I've
from
heard
our
about that.
campus, and they are preventing things before they happen. Now, I will share one example with you. We had an incident a couple weeks ago where a midshipman got out of hand with alcohol and got into a little bit of an engagement with one of these guardian angels. We secured liberty for the entire brigade of midshipmen for 2 weeks. So one alcohol incident was now treated to punish the entire brigade. I can tell you the brigade got that message very quickly. They had a hard time understanding it, but we're now enforcing that type of part of the program. And then, of course,
And do you think, I'm sorry to sort of interrupt, but do you think that that's being heard in sort of the same context for men and women?
I don't have the breakout between men and women. I know men at the Naval Academy have a higher tendency to be involved in binge drinking than women. But in our case, 72% of all this by survey, of all of our unwanted sexual contact has involved alcohol. I'm not blaming alcohol or saying if you take it away
Right.
completely that these things won't happen, but I know reducing that significantly
does
will have
have-
an impact.
And the safe to report that you mentioned, because I think that my understanding is that there are a number of women who feel that they are held accountable if they had a few drinks, and therefore they will not report a sexual assault or harassment because they're then transferred or something happens to them that's negative as opposed. So the safe to report allows them to report without that. Is that correct in terms of
I've
drinking?
never separated a female victim for collateral misconduct.
Okay, and finally, we talk about peer leaders and how important they are. Are we doing the same kind of climate assessments of their leadership so that if it's determined that in fact they're not leading well, that their advancement is hampered, called into question? How actively are you doing that? How much do they know you're doing that? And how many people have you stopped in their career ladder because of that behavior?
This is exactly why we created this new aptitude measuring system. Part of that is to measure their leadership capability, whether they're a junior or a senior. I wanted to make sure that I didn't have anybody flying under the radar that was meeting all the minimums academically and physically, and everything else looked okay because they didn't have a conduct record. This was a chance to have their peers and those that know them best tell us about them. And I suspect, even though this is relatively new, we're going to be putting midshipmen in front of us that have problems that might not have shown up before. So I'm optimistic about this new approach for how to look at that measuring system.
Right, thank you, because sometimes people are achieving, but that doesn't mean that they're acting appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to make a point here that I think is important. We're talking about alcohol, and we would be amiss if we somehow want to place the blame on alcohol, because in the actual survey at West Point, 45% of the women indicated that the alleged offender had been drinking alcohol. So almost half, but not a significant majority of cases. At the Naval Academy, it wasn't broken out quite the same way. It just said nearly 2/3, 64% indicated that they or their alleged offender had been drinking alcohol. And then at the Air Force Academy, it was 53% who indicated the alleged offender had been drinking, and 51% indicated that they had been drinking. So maybe it's half, but it's not 65, 75, 85%. So I don't want us to lose sight of that fact in looking at this issue. Mr. Abraham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Admiral, back to you and Ms. Davis's exchange. The Navy has been recognized for its prevention program in sexual assault and sexual prevention. It's evidently doing some good stuff. Was some of that you mentioned some of the highlights of that program, or would you wish to elaborate on maybe a couple more that the committee could learn from?
The program that we have at the Naval Academy is called SHAPE. It's the Sexual Harassment and Assault Prevention. It's evidence-based education. It's been developed by experts. We've been working on it for 12 years. It's 20 hours of education and training across 4 years. It starts on induction day. It's peer-led, small group session with fleet mentors, and it's been updated. We have peer educators. We have well over 130 that apply for 80 positions, to include varsity athletes, leaders within the brigade. They receive an extensive 2-week program. They lead 9 syllabus sessions during the course of each year. We also have guides that are part of this program. These are midshipmen embedded into each of the 30 companies. Each company is about 150 midshipmen, 2 per company, and they are that resource that knows when somebody's having a problem, can say, hey, here's where the resource is where you can get counseling or make a report. They also receive an extensive 2-week training program, and typically we have about 130 applicants for that. So that's just a thumbnail of what that education program looks like.
And General Severe, is your HRT and CHIPS program similar to that? Give me a little G2 on that.
Yeah, sir, very similar in the elements that they have, in that we all know at this point that small group in this subject matter works best. While initially when our cadets and our midshipmen arrive, we need to get a lot of information out quickly, but we move to CHIPS as the Cadet Healthy Interpersonal Skills, and it was recognized as a best practice to the committee, and we've shown with evidence informed of how that's beginning to change behavior in surveys after they've had some of that. Healthy relationship training, sir, is a lot of the programs that we've done in the past have been about what not to do. And so we tell someone that they can't do this, and they can't touch this, and they can't do that, and they can't do without consent. Healthy relationship training takes a different approach. It teaches them how to have a healthy relationship between 2 people, what consent is, what boundaries are. So it's an approach of how to have a healthy relationship. So those are a little bit different, yes, sir.
Dr. Van Winkle, I'll take this for the record if you need. You can certainly answer it if you can. But I was looking at your resume, and it's quite impressive. But you have a PhD in applied experimental psychology. On these predators, whatever we want to call these people that do these terrible things to these survivors, have you analyzed, is there a blip on the radar screen in something they've done in a personality previously, just that marker that won't definitely say that they're going to go this particular way, but maybe they might?
I would have to take that for the record.
Right.
It's not within my area of expertise, and certainly there is research to predict offending behaviors. It's certainly not a settled science, but I can take that for the record and get you the information we do have on that.
I'd appreciate that as a physician. It would be interesting. And my last question, and General Williams, I'll send it to you, and we can certainly get the others' involvement. On the last panel, Mr. Christensen mentioned in the last one of his talking points, if I understood that right, that athletes are not held to the same level of accountability as other cadets. Now, is that true?
Congressman, that is not true. All athletes, cadets are held to the same standard at West Point, and I'm sure the other academies as well. There's no sanctuary for athletes at the United States Military Academy.
I understand. I see the others not. So, Madam Chair, I yield back.
All right. Ms. Luria, you're next. Is it that you would like to postpone? All right. Let's then move on to Ms. Escobar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Van Winkle, so in the report, one of the reasons why women did not choose to report was, quote, that they would take care of the problem themselves. Does this indicate that there's a problem in the actual reporting process, or that it's cumbersome, or that What are your thoughts about that? Why or just a sense that it's, you know, too painful to go through the process?
I appreciate the question. The data doesn't get at exactly what they mean by when they say that they took care of the problem themselves, either by avoiding or confronting the person. We know a few things, though, from our focus groups. We do go out every other year to talk to the cadets and midshipmen. We talk to them about the survey results. We ask them questions about it. And often what we see in our data is the reasons for not reporting are often very personal reasons, less to do with the system in place, but much more to do with wanting to forget about it and move on. We also have concerns within the Academy about gossiping and peer response, which again speaks to what we're trying to do when we're engaging the cadets and midshipmen themselves. And it also looks a little different than what we see in the active duty. What we hear in the focus groups is freshmen and sophomores often say they would hesitate to report because they don't want that to define them. They're only there for 4 years. Juniors and seniors often say they don't want to report because they don't want the investigation to follow them into the active duty or be defined as they move into the active duty by this report. And all of them talk more about concerns about peer reaction than, again, barriers in the actual system that's in place. And I mentioned the data point that when we do get folks to come forward and report, from our survey data, 81% said that they would make the same decision again. It's getting them to come forward and report that is a challenge we're trying to address.
That peer reaction, that's very interesting. And I feel like that's where we as a society, whether it be in the military or in the private sector, public sector, where people need to feel accommodated and supported by their peers, or that their peers will stand up to that retaliation. So we've clearly still got a long way to go on that front in the military. Thank you so much. To the superintendents, so the 4 focus areas were mentioned: the promoting responsible alcohol choices, reinvigorating the prevention of sexual assault, and the third one I'm very curious about: enhancing a culture of respect. Could each one of the superintendents just briefly tell me how you're doing that?
Congresswoman, yes. As my colleague mentioned, we have a Simon Center for Professional Military Ethic as well. So I have an organization within the West Point that's charged with designing character in this space about trust. But the folks that really are going to get at this daily are the cadets, our tactical officers. Each company, we are organized at West Point into company teams, and each one of the companies there's a captain, a commission officer, and a senior non-commissioned officer with that company. And then our coaches and also our rotating faculty. So all of those folks emulate what it means to be, what respect looks like, what it means to be an officer or a cadet in good standing, so by being good role models. But more importantly, they have real conversations. Last week, and it wasn't because of a result of this panel, but I witnessed we had 119 classes last Wednesday during the Commandant's Hour, which is called a Leader Challenge 3, where we had cadets, the company tactical officers, the academic professors, led by the cadet leadership, where they were talking about real issues. They were talking about sex and healthy relationships that was mentioned earlier. And so what's important is you get the cadets, the faculty, the coaches, all of them pulling the same way in this area. It can't be just the cadre, it can't be the cadets doing this. It requires a comprehensive approach across the academy.
I'll just briefly give 2 examples. One is this life skills handbook that I mentioned in my verbal testimony that we have now initiated. It not only dives down into this understanding of what dignity and respect means from a midshipman perspective, it also helps redefine that for all of our influencers. So our coaches, our faculty, our staff, our sponsor parents, I think it's really critical, and that's built into our in-classroom curriculum. And finally, Sheryl Sandberg came and spoke to the Naval Academy in 2013, and it was where she coined the phrase lean in. And the Naval Academy has taken on lean in circles, and it's really starting to grow even more. There are approximately 200 midshipmen that meet in 12 different circles, and they cover every tough topic of what it means to be a professional. Some of them are all women, some of the circles are all men, some of them are mixed. I think this is a grassroots growth program that we can continue to cultivate. And by the way, we have fleet mentors in there, so they're helping them guide the conversation.
Ma'am,
My time's
Sorry.
expired. Thank you very much.
You can respond.
Ma'am, for us, what that means is that we're looking about the whole person here. It's not just about dignity and respect regarding another gender in the area of sexual harassment or sexual assault, because what we have to teach is that discrimination in all manners, whether it's race, religion, background, sexuality, any discrimination in any way takes away and degrades at that dignity and respect. So we go out of our way to support and encourage a number of affinity groups in the areas of LGB and a number of race groups and ethnic groups that allow them and the cadets interact in that way. I mean, just Friday night, a couple weeks ago, I was with the Jewish cadets as an example. And so we have to continue to show that richness of diversity. And then I've spoken a lot about that to my cadets, specifically about that richness of diversity. We all have remarkably diverse campuses and remarkably diverse student bodies that are continuing to grow that more. That's what we are referring to.
Thank you. Mr. Bergman, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. General Williams, I want to make sure I got this right. Cadets lack trust in peer leaders. Could you just expound on that for me, please?
Congressman, thank you. Yes, the survey suggests that cadets do not have the same respect or trust, and this is about accountability. Part of being a professional, whether it be an airman or is about stewardship, and so they're struggling with, depending on what their class is, ownership for each other. This is a part of what we do in Army. It's the ethos of our culture, the Army culture. So the cadets work very hard on their 47-month experience. They understand General Williams or Captain Smith, who's their company tactical officer, but as they develop and are learning to take ownership for their profession, they have a hard time sometimes holding each other accountable.
Is that something that's happened over time, where because of their high school experience, they're not used to the hierarchy that maybe some of us who are older and went to high school, decades earlier, where now everybody feels as though they, the participation trophy mentality?
Congressman, I think that is part of it. We're taking folks from all over America, and it's a tough transition for some. Some need 47 months, some need a little longer than 47 months to make that transition.
So, since we're talking about, we got blue and gold, do we have black and gold? And what else? What does the Air Force have?
Prop and wings officers, sir.
Okay, so the point is, could any or all of you just describe is this blue and gold or black and gold or prop? Is that a volunteer position? Is it a paid position? Tell us a little bit about who these people are and how much time they have to devote to, if you will, digging into the background of an applicant.
Sir, I'll answer first. Our blue and gold officers are representatives of the superintendent, but work through our admissions department. They are volunteers. They're not always Naval Academy graduates. They're in every voting district throughout the country. They're over 2,000 strong, and they are the eyes on. They're the validation of who we're looking at beyond just what we see on paper, the personal statement, the teacher recommendations, the grades, all of it.
I don't want to dwell on this, but the idea is they are volunteers.
Yes, sir.
So they're working probably a full-time career doing something else. And because of their passion for the service academies, they have volunteered their time to interview, to interact with, et cetera, and to advise potential.
And they're required to get training every periodic moment, or every period of time, about 5 years, so they understand what we're looking for.
Okay, and then one final question that any or all of you can answer: is there any, or maybe Dr. Van Winkle, is there any comparative data to other non-military, your basic public-private colleges and universities, as to the type of behavior, the type of at-risk behavior, if you will, that the 18 to 20-year-olds who are in those first couple of years, I mean, is there comparative data out there that says these service academies have more of a problem than XYZ college or university?
I can speak to that in general terms. We don't typically have a good comparison point in civilian colleges and universities, nor do we compare ourselves with them. Certainly our mission space is different, our expectations are different, our selection criteria is different.
But if we were just, I know my time is going short here. The idea is two friends graduate from high school together. One goes to an academy, one goes to, some other school. They come in, they're matched ideally, if you will, in their experience, their outlook, their everything, they're a match. But then they split and go down two different educational paths. I'm wondering, is the behavior of the individual who chooses something other than a service academy, do we know? Are there differences?
What we do know in looking at colleges and universities comes from a 2015 study sponsored by the American Association of Universities, which looked at 27 colleges and universities across the country. Looking at those rates, comparing them to ours now, which again are slightly apples and oranges in terms of metrics and scientific methods behind it, we're about on par. But as I mentioned, we certainly hold ourselves to a higher standard.
Well, thank you very much, and I yield back.
All right. Dr. Van Winkle, you had indicated that of those that do come forward, 80% of them are happy with the way they were treated. Is that correct? Is that how you put it?
No, for clarification, I would say that 81%, and this is from the survey, so this is an estimate, of those who came forward and reported would make the same decision to report again.
Thank you for that clarification. What I think is important for us to point to, and it's true in each of the academies, it's probably most true at the Air Force Academy, is that women who have not come forward to report do not have a high confidence that they will be protected. At the military academy, 55% of the women indicated they would trust the academy to a large extent to ensure their safety. At the Naval Academy, it was 46%. At the Air Force Academy, it was 39%. So that would suggest to us that there is not the confidence in the academy leadership that their safety will be ensured if only half or less than half have confidence in it. So that's something we should drill down about later. Mrs. Luria.
Thank you for being here to testify today. And I'm trying to go through, some of the comments that have made and rectify these, in my mind versus my personal experience, being that, I attended the Naval Academy and also spent 20 years in the fleet, and as a commanding officer having to deal with these type of situations for sailors who work for me. And there's several comments that have been made, but, I wanted to kind of touch on this in the setting of the hearing because Admiral Carter and I discussed it in my office earlier this week was, how does this compare relative to the fleet or to our active forces? And then, are there any lessons that have been done more effectively within the fleet that we think we should be transferring back to the academy setting? And I'll start with you, Admiral Carter, since we already touched on this.
I certainly think there's things to learn from the two living conditions and the demographics and the age group. I think we could take ourselves down a dangerous path if we think that the 17 to 21-year-old demographic of the fleet is exact same representative of what we see at the Naval Academy.
But, myself in command, and I know yesterday when we spoke, you said you had been in command in some capacity since 1999, and then you were the XO when we served together on Truman shortly after that. That is the demographic, at least from my experience, where most recently these reports come in as far as fleet sailors as well. So why do you consider there to be a difference?
The enlisted sailors that are coming in, and that would be the demographic we're looking at, they're changing. Very different than when you and I served on Harry S. Truman 20 years ago. they're better educated. Many more of them are married. They live a different lifestyle. And then, of course, once we send them out on a ship or on a deployment with an air squadron or on a submarine, they live in a very, very close environment where they're controlled and they're watched, and they're a work environment, and there's no alcohol involved in that. So, you know, over the course of that time in that environment, you're going to see a whole lot less of these unwanted sexual contact data, and I'm confident of that. The midshipmen still are in an academic setting, even though they're in a very controlled academic setting, and that's not to make a pass for, you know, the type of lifestyle they have at the Naval Academy, but it's just a different environment, as you recall, living there. But I think we can still look for best practices that come from the fleet and see if they can apply to what we do at the Naval Academy.
Well, thank you. And so out of all the comments that were made today, there were a couple things that, you know, popped out because I think we're all scratching our head. These are not the results that we wanted to hear. And something that did come up in the earlier testimony was that, you know, the victims' legal counsels, for example, didn't have a lot of experience in dealing with victims. So that is just a point of maybe an area that we could look at what type of training they get. And then, you know, on the side of, you know, medical professionals in the faith community with how they fit into the whole picture of developing midshipmen morally, mentally, and physically, that they tie into that picture with, you know, dealing with the victims. And, you know, I think my frustration as a commanding officer in the fleet when I had sailors who dealt with this was that I felt that the reticence of people to report was because they thought nothing was going to ever happen. And then nothing that was ever going to happen was not because the chain of command didn't take it seriously, because we took it very seriously. But it was more so that the process took so long for anything to happen. It moved at a glacial speed. And like you said, Dr. Van Winkle, you know, people are worried about this in their second-class midshipmen, so junior year, following through with them to the fleet. And so I don't know how to crack that nut of, you know, a more expeditious process to make sure that, you know, it's being handled, but people know it's being handled and, you know, what the results are. Because, you know, Admiral Carter, as we spoke the other day, you said accountability was the biggest issue. But if someone reports something and nothing happens for 18 months or 2 years, that's hard to draw the accountability back because people's memories are actually short. So I don't know if anyone has any comments on that topic.
I'll just say one brief thing. The Victim Legal Counsel was brought on during my tenure here at the Naval Academy. I thought it actually would change and really make a difference for those that had stepped forward. And quite honestly, I did not see more female victims actually go through with the investigation or go through with the preliminary hearing office. Didn't see that change. That Victim Legal Counsel does not work for me. They're independently assigned to the Naval Academy. They're permanent. I found them to be very experienced. They're not first legal job, and they do meet with their survivors or victims in person.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that. That was different than what was mentioned earlier. So. I yield back my time. Thank you.
Ms. Cheney. Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. I wanted to, and I appreciate that the Chairwoman read or submitted for the record the entire email from Colonel Campbell, but I wanted to mention a couple of things that were not read. In the first paragraph of the email, the Colonel says that the SAGR report is, quote, exceptionally important. In the second paragraph, he says sexual assault and gender relations, the report is absolutely a command priority. In the third paragraph, he says, don't for a minute think we believe the class crest is more important than sexual assault. And the paragraph that the chairwoman did read has absolutely nothing to do with victim anonymity. And I think it's very important that the record reflect that is not a conversation at all about victim anonymity. And I think, in fact, victim anonymity is crucial. And I think that it's very important that we not look towards increasing the number of unrestricted reports as our only measure of success here. I think, as Dr. Van Winkle mentioned, there are a number of reasons why people don't report, a number of reasons why they want to be able to report in a restricted fashion, including that they don't want to have this follow them for their life. They don't want to be known as a victim, and I think that's very important. And I think that we need to keep in mind that compassion for survivors and for victims and not look as though we're forcing everyone into a public reporting setting. Secondly, I'd say that while it is true that the report shows that alcohol was a factor in at least half of these incidents that were reported, that's a huge issue. And I think it would be reckless and irresponsible for us if we did not address the issue of alcohol. It's not a silver bullet, it's not a panacea, but when we have something that we know is present in approximately half, in some cases a little over half of these incidents that we know of, we've got to address it. And so I would like to ask each of the superintendents if you could talk specifically about the programs that you have in place, the programs that you think you need to put in place at each of the academies to deal with this issue of alcohol abuse.
Congresswoman, we have a long way to go in this space. We've done everything from a cadet who has created or had some sort of misconduct in alcohol. We put them in the alcohol substance abuse program. It was mentioned earlier about the leader development program. If a cadet commits some act in this space, he gets an F. He gets an academic grade F. It's part of his GPA. So those are sort of one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is every week they work this. Our TAC and TAC NCOs work this really, really hard. Before special events, before every weekend, they do briefings with the cadets. But I'm not satisfied where we are in terms of, I'm having my commandant look at all of our policies in terms of how long we have a number of places on West Point where cadets can, if they're of age, they can't be underage. If they're of age, where they can drink alcohol. I'm relooking all of those, our current policies. And so we're looking at doing some changes in that respect. So we're doing a lot right now, but we're not doing enough, and I'm relooking the whole thing.
Thank you. Admiral Carter?
Ma'am, I started to talk about some of our programs, such as the Guardian Angel program, the Midnight Teachable Moments, the task force that we stood up. I would also tell you that accountability at this lower level of a problem before it turns into a potential assault, when you take away the alcohol piece, as I said, it won't take them all away, but for us, we think it has a significant part. We're redefining what those are. So, for example, if you get a DUI at the Naval Academy, you'll be separated from the Naval Academy. 2 alcohol-related incidents, whether they happen plebe year and senior year, you'll also be dismissed. A failure from an alcohol treatment program will also be cause for dismissal. A higher penalty for underage drinking, even though it's not a zero defect mentality, it's one that we have to continue to go after. And as you're hearing us today, we all meet and talk about our best practices and how we're doing it so that we can get to some more common themes so that we're all doing it about the same way.
Thank you. General Silveria?
Yes, ma'am. After I arrived, I didn't like the way that a lot of the alcohol was available and the way that it was handled within the cadet wing. And so I made a number of changes last year in the availability, how it was served, and I made a number of changes, increasing supervision both at events inside the academy and outside the academy with supervision. The other thing that we've done is we created a training program for our third classmen, our sophomores, because that's the age when they become of age for most of them. So we've created a training program that focuses on prevention of alcohol-related incidents. And all of the commanders have availability, and they use it. If they get a risk factor where they see that somebody has used it, they can put someone in that prevention program, whether they're a 3 degree or not. So we're training, and then it's the increased supervision.
Thank you very much. My time's expired.
All right, that brings us to the end of the hearing. Let me thank you very much for your participation today. I really believe that you want to do the right thing. I also worry that we have not found the formula that's going to reduce the numbers. They can't keep going up. And Dr. Van Winkle, I'm very heartened to hear you say that we are not going to be able to train ourselves out of this problem. We've got to recognize that there is something more that needs to be done. I do know in talking to a couple of the superintendents that you have also realized that once there is a conviction or once someone's identified, some of these cadets have turned into predators, where it wasn't just a once, it was to a number of cadets that they had either sexually harassed or sexually assaulted. So it's a very serious problem, and these are our leaders for the next generation. We have a responsibility. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your commitment. And I'm hopeful that we'll make a number of trips to the academies over the course of the next year to work with you. With that, we will stand adjourned.